This is an incredible story. I was determined we would talk about this because I spotted this one a little earlier, and I thought I like this story for a lot of reasons. Although there was a rather annoying outcome to it, as you'll discover. In the first line here, a pensioner has been fined £130 after he resorted to painting a zebra crossing over a busy road so that he and his disabled wife could get across, because they've been struggling to cross the road. Laurie Phillips was investigated by the police and summoned to an interview at the police station over allegations he'd caused criminal damage. The 78-year-old got fed up with his repeated request to install a crossing near his house, and those calls went unanswered from town hall officials, leaving him and his wife having to wait for long periods of time before they could cross safely. So he painted his own makeshift zebra crossing with illusionary speed ramps accompanied by 10-mile-an-hour signs. For 4 days, road users obeyed Laurie's zebra crossing until the council clocked it and washed it away. Let's speak with Laurie now. How are you, Laurie?
Hi, I'm fine. Thank you for inviting me on.
Hey, it's a pleasure. And you're 130 quid, like, down on the deal, of course. But I get a sense you're probably going to tell me you don't regret what you did here.
Well, I don't regret it in lots of ways. I guess hindsight's always a great thing, and maybe there's another way of going about it, but that was the one that seemed the most appropriate at the time.
Just tell us about this road then. I mean, this, I understand, had been a bit of an issue, not just for you, but for other people in the area who'd recognised this was a busy area.
Well, if you don't, a lot of people would know Muddyford, I dare say, but Muddyford Quay is a very popular tourist destination locally, and people come from miles and miles to enjoy the views and the sea and the green. And so it's always very busy. It's always very busy, not in the freezing cold, but certainly in the summer months. Sure. It's always very, very busy. And last year in particular, it was extreme. And it was very difficult. There was constant streams of cars. I reckoned that we were getting 2,500 cars a day going into the car park when there's only 450 spaces.
Right.
So we had virtually a continual flow of cars going round and round and round in circles. So environmentally, it was disaster. And trying to do anything across the road or even go out was very difficult.
Yeah.
But this has been a long-standing problem. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you carry on. So it's been a long-standing problem, and this is something that you've tried to advance to the council, I understand.
Well, it started 6 years ago. I mean, it's quite a long time ago. It wasn't this council, I should say. At the time, it was the Dorset County Council. And we bought a buggy for my wife to try and help her mobility. And the first time we took it out, we suddenly realised when we got just round the corner to this road which is involved, Chichester Way, and discovered there were no drop curbs. And without those, you can't use the thing. You can't get across the road at all. So I immediately tried to get them put in. It took 10 months to get drop curbs put in, but wow. The council wouldn't put in the zebra crossing that went with it, as it were. So we had the drop curbs, but there was no sign that it was actually a crossing point, very obviously.
Yeah. And
it's been that way ever since. And we kept on asking the council to do something about it, and to no avail. And it got very frustrating. The circumstances were rather weird and strange. That when this was all going on, there was the council happened to be repainting the entire car park at the beginning of August. They suddenly there were these big lorries there, and every night they were repainting the whole car park. So it seemed an obvious time to go to them and say, look, we still need this crossing. Can you paint a few lines, a few bits of white paint along this between these 2 points?
Yeah.
And I couldn't get anybody to listen. There was always excuses. They had a schedule, and so on and so forth. So eventually I just felt very frustrated that when there was the obvious time to do it, they wouldn't do it. And I eventually wrote to the council and said, look, if you don't do it, I'm going to do it. And I gave them a date.
So you gave them notice. I like this.
I gave them notice. They had plenty of notice. It went to about 12 of the councillors, and not a single one replied. Nobody came back and said, "Well, you shouldn't do that. It's illegal. You're not, nothing." And so I took that as a sort of tacit acceptance that they were okay about me doing it because they didn't have the manpower or the money or the time to do it. And for 4 days it was fine. But they were very, very unhappy.
Yeah. So you went out with your bucket of paint. Did you just have white paint? Because the
no, it wasn't. Well, we didn't use a bucket of paint. We used handheld spray cans, which are generally used for marking.
Yeah,
and consequently, they're easy to remove, and it was never going to. I mean, this crossing would never have lasted for any considerable time.
Yes. So a rainstorm would have sorted that out anyway. But the point is, you were making a point, Laurie, and that was what this was all about. What was your first confrontation with the council once it was down and they'd realised what you'd done? How did that pan out?
Well, they were very, very cross. I mean, that was clear. They were very, very cross. And I think they were more cross because of their embarrassment that they hadn't said anything than necessarily as much as for what I'd done, because they clearly could have stopped it by just simply bothering to reply.
Yeah, you'd thought so.
And one of the problems here is that the council is, and I think it's become clear from other conversations since this happened, that this is a problem all over the country, as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
Councils are just not very good at listening. And
I was just going to say, Laurie, has your endeavours, do you think, accelerated their chances of painting an official one, or have you annoyed them so much that they're going to keep this thing hanging?
I don't know. I think it's quite likely the latter rather than the former, but at the same time, the media in general, who've been very kind and helpful, may have embarrassed them sufficiently that they might actually think it's a good idea to do something. I don't know.
So they haven't given you any reason why they can't have a zebra crossing there? Because often, people ask and they say, these are the reasons. There's one down there, so you don't need one, or whatever. You've yet to hear any reason against one.
No, that's not entirely true. In fact, there's a sort of legal problem here where this short road, which is probably no more than about 400 metres from the main road until you go over a little bridge onto the quay proper, or the green, is a 30-mile-an-hour limit, and it's an official 30-mile-an-hour road, and they're not, so they say, they're not allowed to paint the crossing as they have done on the rest of the quay. The rest of the quay is actually leased to the council, and because it's leased to the council, they can paint on it what they like. And round the car park at the other end of the quay, where they have painted themselves there are 4 crossings which have been painted on the tarmac exactly as you've seen the other one.
Yeah.
With just some white paint on the black tarmac, and that creates the crossing. But they're not allowed, so they say, to do that on Chichester Way.
Right. Who would have thought there'd be so much bureaucracy, Laurie, around a zebra crossing? I hope, and thank you for speaking with us. We really appreciate it. I think anyone who has any sort of disability or the need for that kind of access will absolutely understand the frustration of not being able to get across a road with your wife in her mobility scooter as well. But I think most of us also understand it. And you do think, how hard is it to stick a zebra crossing up? He got fined 130 quid for his troubles. But thank you, Laurie Phillips. He's the man who painted the zebra crossing, and they were very cross about the crossing over there at the council.